there's no part of that entire encounter which you can actually call shit. Okay, maybe if HR discovers and you guys get fired, but for the most part, like, the whole idea of you having some sort of a romantic or just sexual relationship with someone from the office, like, the sex and the romance is great, so I don't see why it's described as shit. I would probably look for nicer ways to describe it, like, I don't mix my professional and my personal business, or
the royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who used to believe that bukkake was a Japanese form of martial arts. He is also a man who may have included skipping leg day to his cardio routine. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. I am here to talk about people management. Okay, alright, in reality it's relationships, but essentially, like, relationships are what we're talking about, but in the context of people management. Or, as some people would even call it, HR. And, there is quite a bit of HR that I'll be talking about in the main topic, although that isn't going to be the entire bit of it. I am going to talk about people handling multiple people, or should I say multiple partners. And should you like the episode, should you not like it, should you want to give your feedback, or should you want to suggest a potential topic, then you can hit me up on the social media, which is usually available through the links below for all of them. But in case you're too lazy, you don't want to have a look at them, on IG, it is at the Breakdown_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the Breakdown Podcast. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. And on Bluesky, it is at the breaktimepod.bsky.social. And the DMs are always open. And if you end up on any one of those pages, a nice follow would be highly, highly appreciated. Just mostly because, like, some of us like having a lot of followers because, like, credibility and shit, stuff like that. But all in all, thank you so much for listening. I hope you listen all the way till the end. And this is going to be a very tricky topic for me to discuss because I kind of have to be very objective in a situation that I am very, very closely involved in. And that's going to be very tricky for me to handle. But before I can do any of that, first of all, I want to talk about the idea of polyamory. Or, as someone would have once called it a couple of episodes ago, ethical non-monogamy, and how for some reason there's some guys, more so in the US, but there's some guys that believe that ethical non-monogamy should be the way to go. Now, if you remember a couple of episodes ago, if you've been listening, if you haven't listened, there was an episode where I was discussing Omarion's claims of ethical non-monogamy and how good it is. Well, like I said, I was discussing Omarion, who was busy talking about, the benefits of ethical non-monogamy and how it's like a good thing or something that was there in the past. But like, it's just that it's coming back and people aren't used to it and shit. And it was actually a question that came up, or at least it was a discussion that came up after he was asked about his opinion on a particular R&B artist and songwriter who is currently known for having 4 girlfriends. Now, the artist and songwriter is none other than Neo, who supposedly has 4 girlfriends, and in an interview about a month or so ago, he was busy talking about how he manages time with them. Now, before I can say anything about my thoughts on the entire thing, let me just let the clip play. So, without further ado...
Y'all all go out together, like all 5 of y'all?
Yeah, absolutely. All the time.
Now, who schedules? Like, you know what I'm saying? Is it
My schedule because I'm the busiest. I'm the one that always got something to do.
And they're like nights, or they're random?
It's random, but I'll go. All right. So, for example, on this tour, I'll let this one come out for 7 days. Then she go home. Then this one come out for 7 days. And then this one come out for 7 days. And then we do something all together. Yeah.
I love this. What's my mic on?
It's a beautiful day.
You heard that. I said I despise this. Did you hear? No.
That's what I heard.
So it's 777.
Yeah. And then, with say it's holidays or whatever the case. Mind you, they all get along with each other. I have no problem hanging out with each other. But I think one of the most important things about this is understanding that these are 4 individual women that need their...
It was harder to lie, huh?
Way harder.
Yeah.
Way harder. That's why I'm mad. Like, man, I wasted so much time, so much money.
Okay. If there's anything that I can say is a plus on the whole ethical non-monogamy front, it's the fact that you're not lying to your partner. Like, you're going and, you're sleeping with other people, or at least you're sleeping with someone else, and you're being very truthful with your partner. Like, I think in as much as most people, especially the ones that listen to this podcast, aren't entirely fans of non-monogamy, like, even though that's the case and you wouldn't want your partner sleeping around, like, at least the best part about it is that they're honest, or at least he's honest. And I'm gonna be one of those guys that just decides to say the thing that a lot of people in the comment section were saying, which was, there's a pretty good chance that these women are fucking around. And hey, in my opinion, I believe that it's very, very possible, because imagine you having a chance to be with your partner once in a month. Yes, it's for like an entire week, but it's like once in a month, and he's super busy and he doesn't really have time for you. And when he does have time, he also has 3 other partners of the same gender as you that they want to go and like spend time with and like be with. Like, are you telling me that finding someone on the side low-key wouldn't be an option? Like, that feels like such a plausible thing for me. But granted, it's not like every single person fucks around, That's I think something that a lot of people online today really don't think about as much. It's not like everyone is fucking around, but it does seem very plausible, because it's not like these ladies are going to tune their ovulation cycles to when this guy is available, especially the way the guy said that, like, it's usually at random. Like, how the hell are they supposed to tune the ovulation cycle such that when they're with him, that's when they're like horny, or like they're really, really ovulating, so that's when they really want to shag? Like, when she's PMSing, when she wants, the emotional connection through the physical touch and everything, like, why the hell will he be when she wants all of that, but he's not around, or he's with one of the other girls? Like, that's one of the things that I would probably ask, and I'd probably wonder, which would very easily lead me towards believing, there's a pretty good chance that, even though these women are like the most extreme tier of avoidant that I've ever heard of, they still want some time with their partner. And once in a month is very, very minimal. It's incredibly minimal. Now, granted, it is something that can work for the most part for men who have means. And, Neo's been an artist for quite a number of years. The guy has a couple of massive hits. The guy is doing shows all the time, and I'm sure he will probably write a couple of songs for 1 or 2 people here and there. Plus, I think he's been in like senior executive like music management at some point in his life, or at least for the more recent portion of his life. So the guy definitely does make and does have quite a bit of bank on him. So he can probably afford to have a couple of non-monogamous, or at least a form of ethical non-monogamy with a couple of his girlfriends. The only thing is, I feel like at the level that he's at, and the fact that he's a celebrity, like, he doesn't necessarily need to do that. Now, I'm not saying that having multiple girlfriends is a problem. It's just, when you're at a certain level in the entertainment industry in the US, like, there's an entire, can I call it profession, or like underground industry, which is basically built around you wanting to have, sexual experiences besides your partner very discreetly with the NDA signed and everything, and it actually like operates in a very, very healthy way. Okay, is there really anything healthy about it? That's very up for debate, but like, you find that a bunch of these artists, a bunch of these athletes, a bunch of these actors, like, some of them will want to sleep with like women besides their partner, or will want to sleep with other people besides their partner. And they will essentially like go, they pick a person, and they have a team of people that will go get that person. They will make them sign the NDA, or at least they'll give them the NDA. They might give them some money or some shit, and then they bang whichever celebrity it is they're banging, and none of the celebrity's footprints, or at least none of their fingerprints, are anywhere near this person as far as it being traced back to them. Like, this is something that actually does exist. So seeing that this guy has 4 girlfriends instead of having like 1 girlfriend or wife and then doing that entire thing, it does seem a little bit weird. But considering that the guy does get to be honest, I think it does kind of work, and it's not entirely a bad thing. Also, it's kind of sad because he's depriving the hoes of money, but if he can keep his relationship intact and he can have 4 girlfriends, which is unfortunate because, that's like 3 less women for the rest of us. Well, if it works for him, it works for him. Personally, I have no negative feelings towards the guy. I just hope that most guys don't think that they can actually achieve this even though they made money. But then again, that's just me and those are just my opinions. So I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our main topic of this episode. Now, I'm going to be very honest. This is probably one of the trickiest things I have had to talk about because of how closely it can affect me. And that is the idea of office relationships, or at least affairs in the office. Now, normally it is a bit of a tricky subject. Well, it's either a tricky subject or it's a subject that is very easily kind of killed off because people will decide to easily like end it by saying that they don't take part in that and they do not understand why people would do that, and they basically just end it then. They're like, no, you shouldn't do it. But the thing is, in as much as people might talk about it, they do happen, and some people are very okay with it, and some, to some degree, kind of promote it even. Now, very recently on the podcast Dialogues with Jagero, the infamous sex therapist who I have interviewed on this podcast and spoken about multiple times, known as Maurice Matheka, was busy talking about office relationships and why the higher ups shouldn't kind of get in the way of them and should just let them happen because they're good, blah blah blah. And I did have some thoughts after listening to the particular clip. Now, before I can share any of those thoughts, I am going to let the clip play so that we can have some context. Then I can give my thoughts on the entire thing. So, without further ado,
employers should not meddle with love affair. And the funny thing is this, it's in today's world. If you look back in the day, there's so many people who can tell you that their fathers and mothers met in the office. Actually, it was quite common for couples to say, we met at work. We fell in love, we got married, even where they worked, created an environment where their marriage could thrive as they're doing their work. Today, we are in a world where that is now frowned on. So you wonder where we're going to meet people. And the fact that we spend so many hours at work compared to the hours we spend with our loved ones, I'm not surprised that a lot of affairs will be generated in the office. If I'm doing 40, 60 week hours and I only see my wife 10 hours a week, who do you think I'm going to fall in love with? Or who do you think I'm going to be intrigued or want to spend more time with, have a connection with? That may seem like a soulmate, yet it's not a soulmate. It's just the fact that there are so many factors that keep me from engaging with my wife that I'm now engaging with somebody else's wife or just a woman who happens to be in the office. You're not going to switch off the fact that people are going to be attracted to one another. Again, with the fact that flexibility, when you're working your 9 to 5 hours, and some people have to push the 5 to 7 or 8 with no overtime or with overtime, you're spending so many hours with other human beings. It's very hard not to forge a relationship or some attraction. It's impossible to say you can just switch off that part of humanity. You can't switch it off. So I think employers need to understand the science.
Okay. Now, I'm not gonna lie. Listening to this clip, it does kind of make quite a bit of sense. And, it is something that I've also believed for quite a while. Like, it's very hard to kill off that attraction. And also, fun fact, by the way, Bill Gates and the wife, Melinda, actually met in the offices of Microsoft. It's a particularly interesting story, and it is proof that, there's a shit ton of relationships that actually begin in the office. Now, whether they should happen or they shouldn't is what's up for debate on this episode. And before I can get into actually debating it, let me actually read a story that might actually shed a bit of light on, the other side of this entire thing. Now, there was a very recent story of a head teacher, or at least a teacher, who was recently jailed for attacking another teacher because of a love triangle. Now, I'm just going to read the story real quick, just not the entire bit of it. So it says, and I quote, Anthony Felton, 54, a head teacher, attacked his deputy Richard Pike, 51, with a metal wrench at their school on March the 5th, 2025. The attack was driven by quote-unquote overwhelming sexual jealousy after Felton learned he fathered a child with a teacher who was also in a relationship with Pike. Felton lured Pike into his office, ambushing him from behind and striking him multiple times with a wrench, causing minor injuries, treated in a hospital. Pike, who trusted Felton as a colleague, fell to the ground and tried to fend off the attack. Colleagues intervened after hearing the disturbance. CCTV captured the attack. Felton discarded the wrench, fled, and sent an apology email to staff for the distress caused. Pike's victim statement described betrayal, vulnerability, and lasting emotional trauma, stating he may never recover fully. And I will end quote it there, just because, the rest of it is just like a bunch of like the court talk and like how the guy is supposed to be like sent to prison and shit, blah blah blah, and like the charges and everything, and the fact that the guy at some point apologized. All right, so I'm just gonna skip through all of that because that's not really relevant to this entire thing, but it's the fact that there was a love triangle and both of these teachers were actually messing with one teacher and one kind of got a feeling. Now, back to the question, should office relationships be allowed? Now, normally, whenever you bring up such a talk, the whole idea of office relationships, more often than not with millennials, because they do actually make up a pretty big chunk of the current workforce, them and Gen Z and a little bit of Gen X's, like more often than not, you will hear statements like, you don't shit where you eat. You will hear statements like, oh, you're not supposed to mess with a colleague, or that's just wrong, that's unethical, blah blah blah. And I'm not gonna lie, the phrase you don't shit where you eat usually kind of puts me off quite a bit, just mostly because like there's no part of that entire encounter which you can actually call shit. Okay, maybe if HR discovers and you guys get fired, but for the most part, like the whole idea of you having some sort of a romantic or just sexual relationship with someone from the office, like the sex and the romance is great, so I don't see why it's described as shit. I would probably look for nicer ways to describe it, like I don't mix my professional and my personal business, or I like to separate my business from my pleasure, shit like that, shit that sounds good, but that's just mostly semantics, and I'm probably just belaboring the wrong point here. Now, most of the times whenever you hear statements like that, phrases like that, and what you can call belief systems like that, essentially the boundaries that we have set in the workplace to prevent us from getting into office relationships. And as I continue this, considering that I do work in an office and I do know of some versions of office relationships, if anyone from the office is hearing this, don't worry, I am not implicating anyone, and this is just me talking about the topic in general. All right. But anyways, all that said and done, like we essentially do create boundaries whenever we make a lot of these belief systems. When you say you don't shit where you eat and so on and so forth. And millennials are the ones that I know who've set these boundaries the most. The older ones, yes. The younger ones, it's kind of broken down, but those boundaries are still there. And essentially it's so that you can prevent yourself from getting into some sort of an office scandal or becoming part of office gossip. And what Maurice said is actually quite true, like the employers and HR in general will usually frown upon office relationships, and we kind of need to do the whole debate and see if they're really worth it. Now, I am going to go back in the reverse order of how he kind of described everything, because he kind of brought out three main points. And now, the first one is the question of whether employers should allow office relationships. The next one is why affairs in the office actually happen and what makes them work. And the third one is the fact that they're being frowned upon. And I am going to attack all of them in the reverse order. So why is it that they're frowned upon? Because like more often than not, it's not like it's the employer per se, the person at the top, it's mainly HR. All right. Why does HR actually frown upon office relationships? Now, it's not like I've consulted HR, but at least there are some logical points of reason that I can bring forth that would justify this. So first of all, like the core reason for you going to the office, the core reason why you are an employee in that office is to work. Like your core role, regardless of whatever position you hold in that office, in that organization, is practically more or less the same. You are being brought to that organization to provide value to the organization, and you providing value is supposed to give you a certain sense of value as well. But essentially, you're supposed to provide value to the organization, whether that's making things more efficient, whether that's reducing costs, whether that's increasing profits, and so on and so forth, improving processes and so on. Like, essentially, that's your core role. You're supposed to come to the organization and provide value. Like, that's it. You come, you provide value, you go home. So essentially, like, you having romantic relationships, first of all, kind of interferes with that, or it can very easily interfere with that. And considering how things can get messy whenever people decide to get involved romantically or even just sexually, it can interfere with yours, or at least other people's ability to provide value to the organization, whichever role it is. So, for example, if Brian from finance is banging Sheila from marketing and then ends up having a thing with Helen from procurement, like, that can create a whole cycle of BS, because you might find that Sheila has a grudge against Helen doesn't like Sheila, eventually they start working against each other, blah blah blah, and it kind of spoils the cycle of work. So that in and of itself would have to be kind of killed off by HR, because it'll affect people's ability to work. Then the other reason is today's relationships are just messy. Like, people not having labels, people having too many labels, being exclusive but not in a relationship, being in a relationship but you cheating on your partner in the same exact company with someone else in the same exact company. Like, that sort of messiness can very easily create a bunch of drama and just mess people up, and sometimes it can even lead to very good talent leaving the organization. So if you can stamp that out, then you can probably kill the possibility of that happening to a certain degree. Then the third reason, but I think this is probably the most important one, and the one that probably led to HR actually frowning upon office relationships, is lawsuits. Like, it's not even about most of these bits of like inefficiency and shit, because you can't entirely measure that shit, at least from a HR level, as far as my knowledge is concerned. It's just the lawsuits. You don't want someone to sue the company for sexual harassment. That means that it's money that's leaving the company, and if it's something that can be avoided, then more often than not people will avoid it. And the moment people started suing managers and bosses, and the Me Too movement happened later on, eventually people realized that this can be a cash grab for some people. So if you can stamp it out early enough, or at least if you can stamp it out completely, then you reduce the risk of such a thing happen to the organization. Like, that's what was probably the main reason behind kind of killing off office relationships by HR. But now, considering that HR would do all of that, does that mean that office relationships are bad? Now, I'll be very honest. I think, first of all, it's not even about good or bad. They're inevitable, because like Maurice Matheka said, like, you're basically spending a bunch of hours in the office. People are spending like 8, sometimes 10, sometimes even 12 hours in the office with roughly about the same people. Telling me that you will have zero attraction for anyone, for the vast majority of people, being in an office for that long, especially if you are in a massive office with multiple people in, like 20, 30 and going on, like, the chances of you having some sort of attraction for someone in that office is going to be particularly high. Now, if the size of the office is particularly small, if it's like a small team of like, maybe about 10 or less, probably even 7 or less, then the chances are substantially less, mainly because no one wants to kind of mess up the whole flow of the group, because you're a very tight-knit circle, at least for the most part. But the moment you start increasing the size of like personnel in the office, then the chances of office relationships or office affairs happening starts to increase. The moment you're doing like 20-30 people in the office, and it's like mixed genders, then the chances of that increase. The moment you get into the hundreds, then they're basically happening, and in the thousands, like, there's nothing that's stopping them. So like, the larger the number of personnel in the office at one given point in time, the higher the chances that office relationships and office affairs will actually happen. So it is basically inevitable. Now, are they good? I think to some degree you can say that they are, but do they have their own issues? Yes, they do. But now the question is, should they be allowed? Now, to be quite honest, I think to some degree, whether we talk about their inevitability, they're good or they're bad, them being allowed is very, very tricky, because one of the biggest issues that I would probably see in the whole pursuit of allowing office relationships is, one, dealing with the messiness of the dating market being brought to the office, because it's not like people are going to be completely different people from the dating market and from the office where you're having romantic interests. Like, the same exact behaviors that you have out there, the same exact behaviors that you'll bring here. Like, it's not like you can try and separate it and be two different people. Nah, that's not how it works. At best, you can probably have some boundaries. So when you look at how a lot of people behave out here in the dating market, like, it's a very, very messy place. And even minus the messiness, there's the toxicity, there is the narcissism, there is the philandering, or should I say fucking around. There is also, how people tend to react very emotionally at a moment's notice because they spot something that's happened, with their partner or with someone that they like or dislike. Like, there's so much shit that happens out here in the dating market, and you think about it being translated to the office space, and it just becomes a recipe for disaster. Like, you hear stories of like people or like colleagues in the office fighting over one colleague that they want to be with. Like, you hear stories like that, and it might seem like it's foreign for some people, but that shit happens, and it actually can mess up how people are able to work, which kind of goes back to the whole thing with HR not wanting something that can affect your efficiency in the office, because their job is to make sure that you are operating at your absolute optimum such that you can produce the best results for the organization. So it does kind of work counterintuitively if you were to allow a lot of that shit. Now, of course, there are some office relationships that can work. If you have two level-headed people choosing to have some sort of an office relationship or an office thing, like, they can do their thing, and if it kind of gets done and they are still cordial with each other, or they basically just act like 100% professional with each other, like, if that was the case for a vast majority of people, then yeah, you could say that, let's have office relationships. There's not that many places that people are meeting up, and the office has been taking up a bunch of other roles that were previously outside of the office, like friendships, family, and so on. So if they can take up the whole relationship side of things, why not allow that to happen as well? It can lead for some pretty good stories, and it can allow people to want to come to the office a little bit more. Although, with all of that said, realistically speaking, do I think that they should be allowed? If I was to give a general answer, I'd probably say no. Fortunately, some HR departments, or at least some organizations' HR departments, have kind of found a happy medium where they're like, we don't necessarily want you guys to just be screwing around. So if you are involved with someone, come and report to us so that at least we're aware. I think that probably does work as a particularly happy medium, but for the most part, considering how messy a lot of people are and how crazy some others are and how toxic a bunch of other people are, I wouldn't recommend it for most people. Just as, my opinion. Although, with all of that said, to kind of conclude all of this, I remember there was something that Jordan Peterson once said during an interview where he was like, I don't know if we're ready to conclude and look at the results of what us having spaces where both genders are working together, and like what the results of that will kind of be, and whether it was positive or negative, or how we should sort that out. Like, I remember when he was busy talking about that, it kind of very easily showed how we haven't had the workspace where both men and women are working together for a particularly long time. Like, it's been there for less than 100 years, so there's not that much data and info on how to do it properly that most of us are particularly aware about. But with that said, like, it's an inevitability that if you have people that could be attracted to each other and they're in the same space long enough, then those attractions can definitely be developed over time. Now, knowing this, it does mean that office relationships and office affairs are basically inevitable in a lot of organizations that have multiple people in the double to triple to quadruple digits that are working for them. But now, should we have room for them? Yes, definitely there is room for such to happen, and especially considering that most offices nowadays are taking up more roles that were filled by parties outside of the office, this could be the next step forward. But even though the organization is ready, even though the company structure, or at least HR is probably ready for office relationships and office affairs to happen. I don't think we as individuals and we as people, or at least a good chunk of us, are ready for such to happen. Like the dating market right now, the mess that's out there, the toxicity and the wild shit that happens out there, I don't think that we'd function very well if we brought it to the office. So not unless if people are ready to become a little bit more relaxed and be a little bit more straightforward and have better boundaries and shit, I wouldn't recommend office affairs to most people, just because a lot of y'all tend to function with your emotions at some of the worst times ever. Although, then again, the most interesting part about it is, it's not like I can really stop two people who want to be together even though they work in the same office. So, my opinion is probably moot here. And I might be wrong. Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open on IG, it is at the breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the breaktime podcast. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. And on Bluesky, it is at the breaktimepod.bsky.social. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.